Hello and welcome to New Wave Global. You are watching Unraveled with Marvi Sirmed. This has been quite a week, not just in the USA, but in the South Asia as well. For example, in Bangladesh, the nationwide protests against the civil service quota system intensified last week, leading to violent clashes, killing 25 people at least. The Supreme Court of Bangladesh earlier this week ordered an overhaul to the quota reservation system, after which the protests have tailed off finally. In India, after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's election setback in June, his government presented its first post-election budget and allocated billions of dollars for job creation and for the states run by his key coalition partners. While the law enforcement's encounters with militants and Naxalite Maoist insurgents continued in India-administered Kashmir and Chhattisgarh, alongside the unrest in the northeastern Manipur. In Pakistan, the friction among the political forces and between the military establishment and the judiciary continues, while former Prime Minister Imran Khan is kept in jail. Tensions escalate on the western border with Afghanistan, economy continues to deteriorate, and all that. To unpack and unravel this grand heap of complicated issues and what the US policy may look like in coming months and years, we have a special guest with us tonight who has a deep understanding of the complexities of South Asia. Joining in is Michael Kugelman, director of the Wilson Center's South Asia Institute and a columnist for Foreign Policy magazine. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Great to be back here with you.
So how do you see, for example, let's come to Pakistan first. Okay, before we go to Pakistan, let's see how South Asia looks like under whichever administration comes. For example, if it is Trump administration, how do you see the policy changing? And what exactly is the policy right now?
Yeah, so one thing that's always been regrettable in my view is that there has not been any type of formal South Asia policy from a presidential administration for quite some time. If you go back to relatively recent years, the Trump administration did announce a South Asia strategy. President Donald Trump announced it himself, but it was really focused more on Pakistan and Afghanistan and India. And this is for decades. The U.S. has tended to look at South Asia not as a geographic whole, but more through silos, through the lens of Afghanistan, where of course the U.S. was fighting wars for many years, through Pakistan, though that was always informed by what was happening in Afghanistan, and the other silo was through the India issue. Whereas until fairly recently, the U.S. really hadn't looked at South Asia as a geographic whole. That has started to change in more recent years, but through a new lens, that of geopolitical competition. And that essentially is what the U.S. policy in South Asia is informed by now. The idea of trying to counter China and other U.S. rivals and competitors in that region, which certainly include Russia, which is easy to forget about, and Iran. So the U.S. has tried to scale up engagement with countries throughout the region, not to contain China or those other countries, but to try to essentially provide alternatives, different models of investment, and so on. But it's had limited successes in my view. Now, in terms of what we could expect if there's a change in administration, well, of course, there will be a change of administration no matter what, because we now know it'll either be Trump coming back or it will be Kamala Harris. Generally speaking, no matter who wins the election, I don't really anticipate that many changes from Biden. I imagine there being a fair amount of continuity, just because there's a pretty strong degree of multi-partisan support around this idea, or not just the idea, the need to counter China and other U.S. rivals and competitors, including Russia and Iran. Now, I do think there could be some differences on very specific levels. I mean, Kamala Harris, for example, she might be a bit more vocal on rights issues than Biden has been, including in countries where the U.S. has typically been fairly muted when it comes to commenting on on rights issues. She had, when she ran for president previously, let's not forget that she was a presidential candidate in 2020 briefly. She was critical of Kashmir, of India's policies in Kashmir, and some of that I think was informed by U.S. domestic political considerations, looking to attract the votes from Muslim Americans. But not necessarily. I mean, she does have that reputation of focusing a bit more on rights concerns. And certainly that's the issue with the war in Gaza. I think that she's someone that's been more willing to express concern than Biden would be. But so there could be that small change. But I think the question is, if President Trump comes back, what would that mean? We have the data point of the 4 years he was president previously. And again, a lot of continuity, I think, a lot of similarities. He is very much focused on China, on the China issue. So that would remain his. He would certain his view, his policies in South Asia would be informed by U.S.-China competition, for sure. He has a strong desire to continue partnership with India. He doesn't want to have anything to do with Afghanistan, just like Biden. But I think that it'll come down to just the general differences between Trump and pretty much any other president or presidential candidate out there. He is a business leader by background. He sees relationships with countries similar to how he sees business transactions. Everything is transactional. Everything is about what have you done for me lately. So I think that that could pose some issues, and particularly, and I'll end here, the issue of the relationship with India. Here, there could be some differences because I don't think Trump would be as quiet about the transnational repression as Biden has. Of course, the allegation that India was involved in an attempted extrajudicial killing here. I don't think Trump would stay as quiet about that. And the other thing is trade relations with India. I think that Trump would not be concerned about picking a fight with India over trade if he felt that was necessary for U.S. interests.
Yeah, and this is, you have brought some very interesting aspects to the discussion. So talking about containing China, for example, first, then I'll go to the Pak India and other issues that you have alluded to. So containing China, if Trump comes and we are dealing with Trump administration, he might push for containing China, right? And in that sense, if we look at Mr. Donald Lu, the Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia, his remarks during the congressional hearing that China is a past transaction and the future is the US. In Pakistan, it is being interpreted as either or. Conditionality that might come from USA. Do you think this either or conditionality might come from the Trump administration?
Well, I think there'd be more of a likelihood to hear that from the Trump administration than from the Biden administration. Quite frankly, I was a bit struck by Donald Lu's comments because, he and others in the Biden administration have made very clear that the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy is not about trying to force countries to choose between the U.S. and China. It's more so about accepting what China is up to in the Indo-Pacific region, and that includes parts of South Asia. But it's more about offering alternatives. And I think that Donald Lu himself, speaking publicly earlier this year, said that the Indo-Pacific policy is about providing alternative propositions, other types of investment models. Counter to what China is doing. And of course, the US position, and this goes back to the Trump administration when the likes of Alice Wells used to say these things, that the US has a more transparent, equitable investment model. One could contest that, but this is the US position. So I don't think that Lu meant it that way in his recent comments. I think that his idea is that the US can do it better, perhaps, that the US can provide better investment models than China can. But I really don't think that it's official US policy to try to surpass Chinese investment or displace it. I certainly hope that's not the policy because that would be very unrealistic given how entrenched China is as an investment player in South Asia and certainly in Pakistan. Now, also, going back to the question about containing China, I don't use that term, containing, because I'm not one of these people that think that there's a new Cold War between the US and China. The US is countering China for the reasons that I mentioned, trying to do things better, provide better alternatives. It's not trying to box China in my view. But Trump is particularly hardline when it comes to China. Biden has been quite hardline. And you may recall that when Biden was about to start his presidency, many critics of his on the Republican side thought that he would be a dove on China, that he would roll over. He didn't do that. He took really tough positions on China. He's really pushed the limits of U.S. policy on Taiwan, quite far, to make many people think that the U.S. might be willing to do more to help Taiwan than any other president has. But he's been a hardliner on China. Trump, if he comes back, would be even more of a hardliner. But then again, Trump is a maverick, right? You never quite know what to expect with him. And you remember early on in his presidency, he actually saw China as a useful partner, specifically as a potential mediator vis-a-vis getting through to North Korea. He saw China as a potentially useful player. It wasn't until later in his term, really when the pandemic came out, when he started blaming China for the pandemic, and then, the economic issues, when he became a China hawk. But what I would say is that if you look at the state of play with China and what it's doing in the world, I think that if President Trump looks at China's provocations in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait, the surveillance activities that it conducts, he's not gonna sit quietly in the face of that. But what would be different between him and Biden, I think, or Harris for that matter, is that we've seen that he's perfectly happy to take a bit of a casual approach to U.S. alliances. So he would not necessarily be the president that tries to build more of a global coalition or alliance to counter China, which has been a top priority of Biden vis-a-vis not only China, but also Russia.
That's right. So this is my segue. What do you think about, either it is Trump or it is Kamala Harris administration in future? How would the U.S. administration see the regional, I would say, excitement about BRICS, which is considered to be an anti-US or a coalition of countries. And there is, over the last 1 year, we have seen there is a rush of different countries to join BRICS, including Pakistan. How do you see this unfolding under the Trump administration or even Kamala Harris administration in future?
Yeah, that's a great question. And indeed, BRICS counts as its current members, India. And as you say, Pakistan has expressed interest in joining. Bangladesh has as well. And honestly, I think Bangladesh, strictly by economic measures, has a much greater chance of joining BRICS than Pakistan does. Honestly, I thought that Bangladesh would have been in the group of countries that joined during the recent expansion. So I think that the BRICS issue is reflective of a broader challenge that the next U.S. administration will face in South Asia. And that is that most of the governments are not aligned, meaning that they seek to balance their relations with all the major powers. And so India, of course, stands out the most in that regard. It's very close to the US in the West, but it's also very close to Russia. It's not close to China, but it's not opposed to working with China multilaterally, which it does in a variety of contexts, BRICS, but also SCO and the Asian Investment Infrastructure Investment Bank and so on. But you look at other countries too. Pakistan, we could talk about all these rumors that Pakistan has been supplying small arms to Ukraine, but the official Pakistani position on the war is that it's a neutral. It is not, it's abstained from many of the UN resolutions condemning the war. And this is true with other South Asian countries, certainly Bangladesh, certainly Sri Lanka, and Russia has a pretty sizable influence in South Asia. And I'm not only talking about India. It invests heavily in nuclear energy in Bangladesh. It's exploring investments in hydropower in Nepal. It's there. And so I think that this really gets to this issue of how does the US approach a region that is keen to engage with the US, but also with some of America's biggest competitors and rivals, and that welcome the presence and investments of key US rivals and competitors. And I think the BRICS issue sort of plays into that. Going to BRICS specifically, you're right. I mean, I think it may be seen as an anti-West entity, But I think it's more about trying to provide alternatives to the West. I think that one of the main things BRICS has tried to do, and India is very much on board with this, is trying to create alternative financial models to those of the West. There's been talk about creating a BRICS bank and so on. None of these things have gone very far, quite frankly. And I think that's something that would make the US feel less concerned. There's been a lot of talk in BRICS about new initiatives, but nothing has really come of it. The other thing is that, we talk about BRICS expanding, and everyone focuses on the fact that Iran is one of the countries that's going to be coming in. But the other countries that will be joining BRICS are not at all anti-West. So I think that there may actually be a balancing factor at play with some of the newer members. But I think that for
Like
the
Saudi
US,
Arabia, for example,
yeah,
despite being a Muslim
exactly.
country, it's like it's not anti-West per se.
Right, exactly. And I believe several Latin American countries will be
Yeah.
joining as well. But final point on this, my view is that the US is much more concerned about Modi going to Moscow and hugging Putin than he is about Modi participating in BRICS and some of these other multilateral entities that include Russia and China. I think that the US doesn't like that, but it's accepted that.
That's right. So now going back to the India-Pakistan friction in the region. Um, so during the last Trump administration, Trump he spoke about Pakistan-India peace, and he also offered himself as the mediator between Pakistan and India for Kashmir. Do you see that this kind of passion for Indo-Pak peace will continue in the next Trump administration, if there is one?
Yeah, it certainly will not be a priority for Trump. It's not going to be foremost on his mind. And I question this notion that Trump was offering to mediate between India and Pakistan. He was talking about this several times, but as I recall, he had said that if both India and Pakistan want me to, then I'd be happy to serve the role of a mediator. And India would not want the US or any third party to play that role. So that suggests to me that it wasn't really a genuine offer. I think that, he was saying these things at a time when Trump himself really wanted the relationship to work with Pakistan so that he could get Pakistan to help the US get the Taliban to the table for a negotiation about a U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. That's why he invited Imran Khan to Washington when Khan was prime minister. And so, he was not doing that because he had this deep, abiding love for Khan. It was more, interest transactionally, wanting to basically make him feel important so that he'd be willing to work with Trump in the U.S. on the Taliban issue. So I'm trying to remember where I was going with this. Oh, yeah. So the issue of where were we on this?
Trump mediating.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I don't think that he really genuinely made a mediation offer. I think that India will be an important relationship for Trump. I mean, as it's to be the most seen as the most important relationship in South Asia, and like so many other U.S. presidents, there would be a recognition that if you try to push too hard, if you even suggest that you want to mediate between India and Pakistan and try to help them work better together, that would not go well. That would not go over well in India, because India would always worry that it would come down to Kashmir, and you wouldn't want to have that reaction where you'd have to worry about tensions with India, particularly if Trump comes back. There's a good chance that there would be tensions over trade at some point. There may be more tensions over the extrajudicial killing issue too. So I really don't expect this. I mean, if in the other issue, India-Pakistan relations have been relatively stable the last few years. If that continues, I really don't think Trump would care much about that, looking at that issue at all. But if there is another India-Pakistan crisis, and there could be, and Trump is president again, at that point his people would be tempted to try to get him to take a look at it. And then there's that chance that he could sort of throw that idea out. But again, I think he would only do it if he made it clear that he would be willing to mediate only if both countries wanted him to. And that gives India a way out, so to speak.
Okay. But in Pakistan, previously in 2019, when this Article 370 was abrogated by by Modi as the prime minister. He took back the statehood from Kashmir, and Article 370 was repealed, and other constitutional amendments were made to change the status of India occupied Kashmir. Sorry, India administered Kashmir, which is the more a neutral term. At that time, the interpretation of this entire decision and how Pakistan's reaction was lukewarm. I mean, it was not, things did not escalate to the extent that was expected by the people in both countries, actually. So it was interpreted in the way that, so President Trump was probably involved in it. This was variously spoken by different commentators in Pakistan, at least, that Mr. Trump might have mediated between India and Pakistan, and he supported or assisted the negotiations between Pakistan and India, and Pakistani officials might actually have known beforehand this decision by Indian government. Do you think it is possible that Trump might have had a role in this decision?
I really don't. I mean, who knows at the end of the day, right? I mean, there's only a small number of people that really do know what went down. But given the desire of the Trump administration back then, or any administration, to be very careful, very cautious about how you go about that issue, recognizing that it's a very sensitive one, and you don't want to risk having tensions with India if you jump into it too much. I really don't, and I don't imagine that the U.S. Played any type of role in that. I think that 2019, as you know, was a really significant year for India-Pakistan relations, because there was the Article 370 repeal in August, but then earlier that year you had the crisis, the military crisis, the Pulwama Balakot crisis, and I think that is where there's some interesting issues to be discussed about a U.S. role, right? I mean, Mike Pompeo has said some things since he in recent years, and I think there is reason to believe that the U.S. might have taken a different position on that crisis than it had with previous India-Pakistan crises, in the sense that it didn't immediately jump in to mediate. I just said before that the U.S. doesn't want to put itself out there as a mediator between India and Pakistan. But that's only true in a preemptive, proactive sense. When there's an actual crisis or a conflict between the two, historically the U.S. has very quickly jumped in and tried to mediate tensions. But there's good reason to think that during the Pulwama Balakot crisis, that the U.S. might have held back a bit and not done anything in order to give India an opportunity to retaliate militarily to the attack in India. And I think this is something that I would think concern many in Pakistan, just because the U.S. had that consistent position. So that's for me, that's the interesting scenario to look at vis-a-vis a U.S. role with India and Pakistan. When there's next a crisis, how could the U.S. respond? But when it comes to Kashmir stuff, I really think that the U.S. would continue to take a hands-off role. When India did do the Article 370 repeal, fairly muted response from the Trump administration. There had been some expressions of concern, including from Alice Wells, about the crackdowns that took place right after the repeal and the internet shutdowns and so on. But that was all about those were responses to rights issues, not about the territorial or the sovereignty or the legal implications of the Article 370 repeal.
Yeah, that's right. But you see, if you look at with the lens of countering Chinese influence in the region, changing the terminology from containing China to countering Chinese influence, don't you think it will be, even if it is Kamala Harris administration, don't you think it's more appropriate to try to engage Pakistan and India into into peace talks, this peace dialogue that has been suspended after 2019's decision. Will it not, create an environment to counter Chinese influence on Pakistan at least?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, especially because we've seen China want to show off its capacity to be a peacemaker or a mediator, right? We saw that with the Saudi-Iran deal, and there have been a few other examples, perhaps in the Middle East, where China has positioned itself to be a mediator. But the way that China looks at India and Pakistan, it's very complex. I think China, like the U.S., has a strong interest in a relatively smooth, workable India-Pakistan relationship, because China doesn't want there to be another conflict. It would be not good for Chinese interests, mainly because of all the Chinese investments and equities in Pakistan, among other things. Um, uh, but at the same time, China has this very difficult relationship with India, and I am not sure, quite frankly, that China would have the leverage to, as seen by New Delhi, to play that role of a mediator. I mean, China does have that capacity with many other rival pairings. I mentioned Saudi Arabia and Iran, but I think with India and Pakistan, maybe not as much. And not to mention, China is itself, part of the Kashmir dispute, right? I mean, we know that. I mean, the whole Ladakh issue and so on, it relates to China very directly. Not to mention, China has its own border dispute with India. So I think that China would have a strong interest in the India-Pakistan relationship being in a better place, but I don't think China itself is in a place to try to play that role of moving the two countries into a better place.
Yeah. So my just last two questions. This is about the human rights. Like you also mentioned, if it is Kamala Harris administration, it would be more focused about the human rights issues. But over the last few weeks, whenever I have spoken to any panelist from India and from Pakistan, and I have raised the human rights issues, uh, invariably I've got the retort back from them that what about the human rights issues in the USA itself? They are looking at what has been happening to students' protests, and recently the protests at the Capitol in front of the Capitol Hill, where I think 200 people were arrested. So
Mhm.
this has been the retort invariably from everyone from South Asia. How do you see it? Do you see this kind of, with this kind of track record, USA will be able to speak about human rights issues in the rest of the world?
Yeah, this is a critical question. And it gets into a much bigger issue about how does the U.S. balance its foreign policy in terms of emphasizing values versus interests, right? It's true that the Biden administration has very explicitly identified democracy promotion as a pillar of its foreign policy, and it's the first time that's happened since probably the Clinton administration, but actually maybe even more so the Jimmy Carter administration. I think it's not a good idea at all, because whenever you do that, you're open yourself up to allegations of double standards and hypocrisy, and especially given what's happened over the last few years with the U.S. position on the Israel-Hamas war, the war in Gaza. And not just that, I mean, the selectivity with which this administration has pursued democracy promotion, right? I mean, as we well know, it's been fairly muted about the very, very troubling state of affairs in Pakistan with democracy or lack thereof. Whereas until relatively recently, it had been very vocal about the situation in Bangladesh, leading up to Bangladesh's elections earlier this year. So, and indeed, given what the U.S. is going through some of its own challenges with democratic backsliding, whatever term you want to use. So, my view is that it's better if you want to bring these issues up, if you're a U.S. policymaker and you want to bring these issues up in India or whatever country it may be, A, at the very most, it's important to be humble and acknowledge that, we're going through some challenges ourselves, and we want to have a conversation with you, keeping that in mind. Uh, B, you don't want this to be a public narrative. I think you get yourself in a lot of trouble when you make this into a public thing. I think it's much better to bring up in private conversations with interlocutors in New Delhi or wherever the case might be. That said, these human rights concerns will always be, they're always they should not be neglected, obviously, just from a general perspective. And I think that this is an era where democracy in South Asia is experiencing particular levels of strain, right? I mean, it's ironic. This is a year of many elections in South Asia, and yet, you have a lot of issues about democracy separate from electoral democracy. So, I think that there's a place for interventions. Maybe that's the wrong term to use in this context. There's definitely a place for credible, respected entities to be bringing attention publicly to these rights issues, whether you're talking about human rights organizations or the international media or whatever the case may be. I just think that the U.S. government is not the best entity to carry out this messaging, especially not publicly.
Yeah, but we cannot undermine the importance of Magnitsky Act, which the human rights
Mm-hmm.
organizations here keep talking about. That every dealing, every agreement, every engagement with other country, foreign country, should take into account the human rights situation there. My last
Mm-hmm.
question, I know your time is very precious. My last question is about, again, the Trump administration. It has two parts. One is, and I think we have talked about it, but I would still like to ask you this. Why Biden administration did not engage with Imran Khan's government? Did they not like Pakistan, or did they not like Imran Khan? And do you think if Trump comes, Trump will be able to, get Imran Khan released from jail, which is the expectation in Pakistan?
Yeah, great question. You saved the spiciest question for last. That's a great question. I feel that we've maybe talked about this before. I think there's several factors in terms of why the Biden administration didn't engage with Imran Khan. One is that I think that Imran Khan has not exactly covered himself in glory in in doing things that could make the Biden administration want to engage with him, right? I mean, he had always taken very sharp, strident positions against U.S. policy, and he became very popular for that. His threats to shoot down drones, and of course his reaction to the Taliban takeover, where he basically said that Afghans have removed the shackles of slavery. Um, and then the key moment when he went to be with Putin at the moment that the invasion was playing out. I think that these are not things that would make the Biden administration want to engage with him. And Pakistan, quite frankly, is not important enough of a country from a U.S. perspective to warrant Biden saying, okay, there are these things we don't like about him, but we still need to deal with him, or we still need to engage with him because it's important. You see what I mean? There just wasn't a view that Pakistan was important enough for that. At the end of the day, when the Biden administration had to engage with Pakistan on high levels when Khan was prime minister, they went to the army. They went to the foreign minister, to Qureshi. They went to others high up, but not Khan. And I think it's one reason for it is they didn't feel there was a need to, and also he really had not endeared himself to the U.S. Now, of course, this is the very explanation that fuels these silly rumors that the Biden administration was involved in his ouster. It was not involved in his ouster, but I think that there are those data points, those positions that Khan took that made him not very popular with the Biden administration. Now, if Trump were to come back, what would that mean for Khan? I've noted that many of Khan's supporters seem to really like Trump. And now that could be because there are a fair amount of similarities between the two. It could be because of this view that Trump didn't start new wars and so on. Well, he may not have, but he did some really he did some things in Afghanistan during the last period of the U.S. presence there that were quite bellicose, quite frankly, loosening the terms of engagement to allow U.S. forces to use more force. That was something he did. I think also that many Khan supporters think that Trump liked Khan. They had a nice chemistry. They met several times. They hit it off. He invited Khan to the White House. As I said before, that was really for transactional reasons. I do not think that Trump would go out of his way to try to advocate on behalf of Khan. I mean, it certainly could be that some members of the diaspora here, as you know, there's a very strong support for Khan among the Pakistani American community. Some of them might be close to Trump, and they might try to, push him to say something on the campaign trail about Khan, or perhaps even, bring up the whole conspiracy issue. I wouldn't rule that out, but if Trump comes back, he's going to be focused on many, 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 many other things, and I really don't think that Pakistan, much less Khan, will be much on his mind if he were to come back as president.
Okay, I promise you, this is my last question because this popped in my mind while you were answering the previous one. It is about the resolution that was supported by, it was an unprecedented bipartisan support. The resolution for democracy and human rights in Pakistan, which is perceived as, in Pakistan, it is perceived as pro-Imran Khan and anti whatever forces are there. So what do you think? Why bipartisan? If Pakistan is not important enough under the current geopolitical arrangements in the South Asian region, and if Imran Khan was not very was bellicose against US and US policies, why this kind of bipartisan support for what Imran Khan wants to listen?
Yeah, so I think that congressional resolution was really a lot more about Pakistani domestic politics than U.S. domestic politics. I mean, it was really a reflection of just how popular and influential Khan is among the Pakistani American community, which is certainly not the largest diaspora in the US, but it's one of the fastest growing Asian diasporas here. It's increasingly political, and it is quite pro-Khan on many levels. I mean, you do have some members of the diaspora that are members of the PTI and are leaders of the PTI in Houston, for example. There's several top PTI leaders live there. And so I think this is what we, there's a combination of advocacy by the PTI party with US elected officials, and also just the fact that you have growing numbers of Pakistani Americans that were genuinely concerned about what was happening back home with the onslaught on democracy, and telling their members of Congress that, and basically pushing their members of Congress to speak out on that. And they did. And, the way congressional politics work in the US is that if you've got constituents, especially in an election year, that are feeling passionate about something and wanting you to do something, you're going to do it. And in terms of what that means to do it, it could mean putting out a congressional resolution. And resolutions, they're non-binding, they're not policy. The administration can ignore them, and so on. So this is why, you had this situation where you had this incredibly lopsided vote with nearly every member of Congress, nearly every member of the House of Representatives voting for it. That's significant, but it's really came out of this advocacy and other efforts made by Pakistani Americans to their elected officials. And it's, at the end of the day, doesn't mean that much. I mean, symbolically, it's huge because it shows the clout of PTI and Khan, but it doesn't have anything. It's not going to lead to policy. And if you look at what exactly was in the resolution, it was calling for supporting democracy. And, I'll credit the Pakistani, well, he's now the former Pakistani ambassador. His last public appearance was at the Wilson Center. He spoke the day after the congressional resolution went through. He said, what member of Congress won't want to support democracy in a resolution? And if you look at it, it called for an investigation into the election. It brought attention to, serious allegations of rigging and all of that. That reflects a pro-PTI position. But elsewhere, it was calling for, more human rights, more respect for democracy. That's not necessarily just the PTI position. And what was also significant is that there was one part of the resolution that was highly critical of the 2018 election. And PTI would not want that in the resolution. So yeah, there's a lot of nuance at play here. But bottom line, what I would say is that we shouldn't overstate the significance or impact of a congressional resolution on Pakistan, even if it passes by a lopsided vote, because it doesn't necessarily have any impact for U.S. policy.
That's right. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Uh, I was just wondering what the US next administration, will there be a bipartisan push for Imran Khan's acquittal, after this resolution? Is this the natural next step?
Yeah, that's a good question. And certainly I should say there are some members of Congress that have stated their admiration and support for Imran Khan. I would argue that most of the members that voted for that don't really care much about Imran Khan, but they are willing to express support for democracy. But there is a lot of momentum now in Congress because of this resolution. And so that could create the incentive for additional resolutions that might call for the release of Imran Khan. But again, that's not necessarily going to translate to impacts for policy.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, thank you very much, Michael. That it's always a pleasure talking to you, and you unpack and analyze the situation. Your deep knowledge of South Asia, and your concise, precise and very sharp analysis is always appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate the kind words. It was great to speak with you.